The sound of silverware clattering to the floor cut through the cozy hum of the restaurant. A middle-aged man slumped forward onto his plate, motionless. "Somebody help. He's not breathing," a woman screamed. Across the room, a young waitress in a white apron froze. Glasses of water trembling in her tray. Whispers spread among the diners. "She can't do anything. She just serves food." But in the next instant, the tray crashed to the ground. The girl knelt beside the man, her hands placed firmly on his chest. Her voice was steady, commanding, and perfectly clear. "Call 911 now. He's in cardiac arrest. I'm starting CPR." The restaurant lights glowed warm and golden against the twilight outside, casting long reflections on the polished wood floor. Bella Vita was small by city standards. But to Linh Tran, it often felt like a world of its own, a stage where she played the role of just the waitress. The invisible extra in everyone else's story. Every evening after classes, she tied her hair into a tight ponytail, slipped into her black slacks and white button-up shirt, then tied the apron around her waist. The apron, she often thought, was like a shield and a cage at once. It protected her from questions about who she was. But it also confined her to an identity that wasn't her own. The double life. By day, Linh was a third-year medical student at a California university. Her backpack bulged with anatomy atlases and physiology notes, and her days stretched into long lectures, rotations at the hospital, and hours of memorizing pharmacology. By night, she carried trays heavy with pasta dishes, poured glasses of Chianti, and endured the impatient waves of hands snapping for service. Most customers never asked her name. To them, she was simply, Miss, or worse, "Hey, girl." Some didn't even bother to look at her face when they spoke. Once, a businessman in a suit waved her closer and said slowly, as though speaking to someone who didn't understand English, "Water. Cold. No ice." "Got it." His companions chuckled quietly at his pantomime. Linh bit the inside of her cheek, nodded politely, and returned with exactly what he asked for. What she wanted to say was, "I understand you perfectly well. I can discuss the conduction system of the heart in English better than most Americans in this room." But she swallowed her words, reminding herself, "Not here. Not tonight." The wall of assumptions. Being Asian in America meant she carried invisible labels. Being a waitress meant those labels doubled. People assumed she was a recent immigrant, struggling with the language, or worse, that she wasn't intelligent enough to do anything beyond clearing plates. Sometimes she overheard fragments of conversations when customers thought she was out of earshot. "She's probably here on some kind of visa, right? Kids like her never make it past community college. Just smile at her, she probably doesn't get it." Each remark pricked her skin like needles. She learned to hide behind silence, her expression neutral, her steps brisk. But when she was alone, wiping down tables after closing, she sometimes allowed herself a deep breath, the ache of invisibility pressing down on her chest. Quiet strength. Linh had grown up in a small apartment with her parents, who had immigrated from Vietnam when she was a child. Her father worked nights at a warehouse. Her mother took on shifts at a nail salon. They rarely complained, but their tired eyes told Linh everything. "You are our future," her mother would remind her softly, massaging her sore wrists. "Every hour we work is for your white coat one day." That promise was what pushed Linh to wake at dawn, study relentlessly, and accept the restaurant job without protest. Every tip she earned was another drop in the bucket for tuition. Another inch closer to the dream. But dreams, she knew, often came at the price of dignity. She endured insults. She endured invisibility. Because one day, she believed, the same people who dismissed her would see her differently. Small acts of defiance. Even while trapped in her role at Bella Vita, Linh refused to let go of who she really was. During slow nights, she slipped into the pantry, spreading napkins on the counter and scribbling notes for her pathology exam. On one napkin, she diagrammed the chambers of the heart. On another, she practiced the sequence of steps for CPR. "Kid," the manager once said, catching her mid-scribble, "customers don't care about anatomy in here. You want to succeed? Just move faster and smile." She apologized, tucking the napkins away. But inside, she whispered to herself, "No, one day, I'll be the one people look to in a crisis. Not you." A night like any other. On the Friday that would change everything. Bella Vita was humming with its usual blend of clinking glasses, sizzling pans, and jazz music from the speakers. Lin floated between tables, balancing trays with practiced grace. To the diners, she was a shadow, someone to wave over when bread ran out or wine glasses needed filling. To herself, she was rehearsing flashcards in her head, silently reciting, beta blockers reduce heart rate by blocking adrenergic receptors. CPR ratio 30 compressions to 2 breaths, oxygen saturation should remain above 95%. It was a strange kind of double life, her body working in service, her mind living in medicine. As she passed a table of laughing businessmen, she heard one murmur, "She looks too fragile to carry those plates. Surprised she hasn't dropped them yet." Another smirked, "Maybe she's only here because she couldn't cut it at college." The words stung, but Lin didn't falter. She kept walking, posture straight, tray balanced. Her silence was her shield. The spark of fate. Little did she know that within hours, those same customers, and the entire restaurant, would witness something they would never forget. The night would prove that Lin Tran was more than the role assigned to her. More than the girl behind the apron. Because soon, a single sound, the sudden clatter of silverware, would rip the mask of invisibility from her face and reveal the truth of who she was. The bus ride to campus always felt longer than it should have. Maybe it was because Lin had learned to measure time not in minutes, but in sacrifices. Every minute her father worked overtime at the warehouse, every minute her mother bent over another client's nails, was a minute bought for her dream. And so, when she sat on the bus at dawn, clutching her medical textbooks, she told herself she wasn't just commuting, she was carrying their sacrifices with her. Days at the university, medical school was a battlefield of endurance. Lin's mornings began with dense lectures in pharmacology and pathology, professors scrawling furious diagrams across whiteboards. She filled notebook after notebook, her handwriting neat but hurried. Afternoons bled into hospital rotations, where she shadowed residents who barked questions faster than she could answer. "What's the normal ejection fraction of the heart?" a cardiology resident once demanded as they walked briskly down a hall. 55 to 70%. Lin replied without hesitation. The resident gave a short nod, then moved on, already questioning the next student. For many of her peers, moments like these were intimidating but manageable. For Lin, they carried a different weight. She wasn't just answering to prove her knowledge, she was answering to prove her belonging in a world where she often felt like an outsider. Some classmates underestimated her, just as customers at the restaurant did. "She's so quiet," one whispered. "Yeah, wonder if she'll survive residency." Another replied. Lin heard them, but she never retaliated. Silence was safer. Silence was armor. The hidden hours. When lectures ended, most students went home or studied in the library. Lin's evenings were different. She hurried to Bella Vita, changed in the staff restroom, and slipped into the role of waitress. Between taking orders and refilling drinks, she often pictured her classmates in well-lit libraries, their laptops glowing as they highlighted slides and rehearsed case studies. She envied their hours of uninterrupted focus. For her, every equation memorized came at the cost of carrying trays. Every flashcard reviewed was stolen during a lull in the kitchen. At midnight, when she finally returned home, she opened her textbooks again. Her parents often found her asleep at the kitchen table, face pressed against pages filled with notes. They draped blankets over her shoulders without waking her, their pride and worry tangled together. Family sacrifices. Her parents rarely spoke of their struggles. Her father's hands were perpetually calloused, his back stiff from years of lifting boxes. Her mother's wrists were swollen, the skin around her nails rough from chemicals at the salon. Yet they smiled when she talked about medicine. They listened intently as she explained heart murmurs or the effects of hypertension. Even if they barely understood. "Study hard, Con Gore," her father said in Vietnamese one night. "Your hands will save people. Not like mine. My hands only move boxes. Your hands built my future." Lin whispered back, but he had already closed his eyes, too tired to respond. The guilt of their sacrifices weighed heavily on her. Every time she tied on her apron, she told herself, "This is temporary. I will carry them to a better life." The immigrant burden. Being first generation meant straddling two worlds. At school, she was expected to excel in an environment where subtle prejudice often lurked beneath the surface. At work, she was treated as though she had no future beyond the tables she served. At home, she was the bridge between her parents and a culture they never fully adapted to, translating bills, explaining legal documents, managing doctor's appointments. She often felt split into fragments: daughter, student, breadwinner, server, and yet, none of those fragments seemed to be enough to prove her worth. Some nights, exhaustion threatened to consume her. She stared at medical terms until they blurred, the hum of the refrigerator lulling her into half-consciousness. But then she remembered her mother's words. Every table you serve is another brick in your road to a white coat. So she pushed forward, brick by brick, a quiet resolve. One evening, during her hospital rotation, Linh witnessed her first real cardiac arrest. The patient was a man in his 60s. The room erupted into chaos, alarms shrieking, nurses rushing, the code team shouting instructions. Linh stood at the edge, heart pounding, but her eyes absorbed every detail: the compressions, the intubation, the medication. When the man regained a pulse, she felt her own lungs expand as though she had been holding her breath. Later that night, she replayed the scene in her mind over and over, memorizing each step. This is what I'm training for, she thought. This is why I endure everything else. It was strange to carry that knowledge back into the restaurant, where she was invisible again. No one there knew she could identify a heart arrhythmia on an ECG or recall drug dosages under pressure. They saw only a girl who refilled their wine. But Linh knew, and that was enough to keep her going. The pressure builds. As exams loomed, so did bills. Her father's hours had been cut back at the warehouse, and her mother developed chronic wrist pain that limited her salon shifts. The family's income shrank just as Lin's tuition payments approached. She picked up extra shifts at Bella Vita, sometimes working until 2 a.m., then heading straight into morning lectures. Her body protested, her eyes red, her hands trembling from fatigue, but she forced herself to persist. "Are you okay?" a classmate asked one morning, noticing the dark circles beneath her eyes. "I'm fine," Linh lied, "just tired." She couldn't tell them the truth, that her life was held together by sheer willpower and caffeine. Foreshadowing the night, on the Friday that would change everything, Linh almost gave up her shift. She was behind on reviewing cardiovascular pharmacology, and every cell in her body begged for rest. But when her manager reminded her how busy the evening would be, she nodded, too guilty to say no. The restaurant was buzzing that night. Tables filled with couples celebrating anniversaries, businessmen closing deals, families laughing over shared plates of pasta. Linh moved swiftly between them, her mind split between orders and the echo of her professor's voice explaining myocardial infarction. The businessman at table 7 whispered again, the same ones who had mocked her before. "She's probably failing out of school. Look at her, too fragile for anything serious." Linh ignored them, delivering their drinks with steady hands. But inside, a storm brewed. She wanted to shout, "One day, you'll see who I am." She didn't know that the moment of revelation was already on its way. The sound was small at first, just a fork slipping from a trembling hand. A faint metallic clatter against porcelain. Then came the heavier crash of a wine glass tipping over, red liquid spilling like blood across a white tablecloth. And finally, silence. The man at table 6, a broad-shouldered executive in his 50s, slumped forward, his head burying into his plate of linguine. His wife screamed, shoving her chair back so hard it toppled. "He's not breathing," she shrieked. "Somebody, please, help." For a few heartbeats, the restaurant froze. Forks hung midair. Conversations stuttered to a stop. Eyes wide and uncomprehending. It was as if no one could process the scene before them. Then panic rippled outward like a wave. Chairs scraped. People rose to their feet. Voices overlapped, shocked gasps, fragmented shouts. A man fumbled for his phone but dropped it. Another woman covered her child's eyes. And in the middle of it all, Linh stood motionless, a tray of water glasses trembling in her hands. The split-second decision. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to move. But she hesitated for half a second. What if I make a mistake? What if they don't believe me? Then the training she had drilled into herself, the diagrams, the protocols, the countless nights of memorization, ignited in her mind. She set the tray down. Too hard, water splashing onto the floor. Then she dropped to her knees beside the man. "Sir, can you hear me?" she called, tapping his shoulder firmly. No response. His skin was pale, lips already tinged blue. The wife sobbed, clutching his arm. Please, somebody do something. Lin inhaled sharply, and when she spoke again, her voice was loud, clear, and commanding. Call 911 now. He's in cardiac arrest. I'm starting CPR. The whispers began immediately. What does she know? She's just a waitress. But Lin ignored them all. The first compressions. She interlocked her hands, placed the heel of her palm on the man's sternum, and pressed down with controlled force. Her body rocked with each thrust. 1, 2, 3, 4, she counted under her breath, the rhythm anchoring her against the chaos around her. The wife sobbed harder. A man hovered nearby, useless, wringing his hands. Another diner muttered, she's gonna break his ribs. But Lin didn't waver. Better broken ribs than no pulse. She thought grimly. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. She tilted his head back, pinched his nose, and sealed her lips over his. Her classmates had teased her about the awkwardness of practicing rescue breaths on mannequins. But now, it was deadly serious. The man's chest rose, then fell. Still no response. She resumed compressions. Faster now, sweat forming at her temples. The weight of doubt. Around her, disbelief still lingered. Some diners whispered that she didn't know what she was doing. Others clutched their phones, frozen between calling emergency services or filming. Her arms ached, but she kept going. She remembered the hospital code she had watched. The precision of the doctors. The mantra her professor had drilled into them. Do not stop. Keep oxygen moving. Seconds matter. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. She muttered again, her voice low but steady. When she looked up briefly, she saw the faces of the businessmen who had mocked her earlier that night. Their smirks were gone. They stared at her with wide eyes. Uncertainty etched across their features. For once, they weren't laughing. Time stretches thin. Minutes in real time felt like hours in Lin's body. Each compression sent a jolt of pain through her wrists. But she forced herself to continue. Her breath came ragged, but she didn't dare stop. The restaurant's noise faded into a dull roar in her ears. She existed only in the rhythm of her hands. The rise and fall of the man's chest. The desperate hope that something, anything, would change. Is he alive? Someone whispered. Should we wait for the ambulance? Another asked. But Lin answered with action, not words. The faintest response. On her 4th cycle, something shifted. The man's chest twitched beneath her palms. A faint gasp rattling in his throat. His lips parted, releasing a small, shallow breath. He's breathing, his wife cried, clutching his hand. But Lin didn't stop. She checked for a pulse, weak. Freddie, but there, relief surged through her, but she forced herself to stay calm. Keep 911 on the line. She ordered the bystander with the phone. Tell them we have a pulse but he's unstable. The crowd, which had been teetering on the edge of chaos, now leaned forward with collective hope. Murmurs of astonishment filled the air. That girl saved him. She knew exactly what to do. She's not just a waitress. Authority in the apron. The siren's wail grew louder outside. Lin maintained compressions lightly, monitoring the man until paramedics burst through the door with equipment. We've got it from here, one EMT said. Kneeling beside her, Lin quickly relayed details. Her voice crisp and professional. Male. Mid-50s. Sudden collapse. No pulse initially. CPR started within the first minute. He regained spontaneous breathing after the 4th cycle. Pulse weak but present. The EMT blinked at her, surprised by her precision. You in medicine? 3rd-year med student, she said simply, wiping sweat from her brow. As the team lifted the man onto a stretcher, the room finally exhaled. Diners whispered, stared, all clapped softly. The businessman who had mocked her earlier avoided her eyes entirely. For the first time in years, Lin felt the apron loosen, not physically, but symbolically. The cage it had represented was breaking open. For a long, trembling moment after the paramedics wheeled the man out, the restaurant was completely still. The sound of the swinging doors closing behind the stretcher echoed like a punctuation mark on the night's chaos. Then came the quiet murmurs. She saved his life. I didn't know she could do that. That girl, she's incredible. Lin remained kneeling on the floor, her hands resting on her lap, trembling with exhaustion. The adrenaline that had fueled her compressions now drained, leaving behind a hollow ache in her arms and a ringing in her ears. She stared at the damp floor where water from the fallen tray mixed with drops of sweat. Her apron felt heavier than ever, Soaked in more than just the day's labor, it carried the weight of what had just unfolded. A room transformed. Slowly, people returned to their seats. But the atmosphere was forever changed. No one resumed eating with the same careless chatter. Couples spoke in hushed tones. Families glanced at Lin with reverence. Even children, who moments earlier had squirmed in their seats, now stared at her as if she were some kind of storybook hero brought to life. The wife of the man who collapsed lingered by the door before following the stretcher out. She looked back at Lin, her eyes brimming with gratitude too heavy for words. She mouthed silently, "Thank you." Lin bowed her head slightly, unable to respond. The manager's pride. Lin. A voice broke through the fog. It was Marco, the restaurant manager, his expression a mix of disbelief and pride. He had always considered her one of his most dependable servers. But he had never looked at her quite like this before. You were amazing," he stammered. "I didn't know you." He stopped, shaking his head. "Forget it. Everyone saw. You saved him." Co-workers gathered around, patting her back, some whispering, "We had no idea." For years, Lin had been the quiet one who never complained, who picked up shifts when others called out, who studied in the pantry when no one was looking. Tonight, they saw more, and yet, the recognition felt strange, unreal, almost unwelcome. Lin wasn't sure she wanted their admiration. All she had wanted was for the man to live. The shame of the mockers. From the corner, the group of businessmen sat stiffly, their expensive suits suddenly appearing out of place in the humbled room. The same men who had mocked her fragility, her supposed lack of intelligence, now kept their heads bowed. One of them finally stood, adjusting his tie nervously, and approached. I owe you an apology," he said, his voice quieter than his earlier arrogance. "I misjudged you." Lin looked at him, her chest still heaving from the exertion. She said nothing. Instead, she rose slowly from the floor, dusted her apron, and turned away. Sometimes silence was louder than words. The applause. As she moved toward the kitchen to wash her trembling hands, the restaurant erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. It began softly, one table clapping, then another, until the sound filled the room like thunder. Lin froze, her back to them, her heart pounding. She wasn't used to being seen, let alone celebrated. For years, she had existed in the periphery, invisible, underestimated. Now, all eyes were on her. She turned slowly, offering a small bow of acknowledgement. But inside, she felt the weight of something bigger than pride. It was responsibility. After the storm, when the clapping subsided, Marco insisted she take a break. She sat in the empty staff lounge, her hands trembling as she gripped a paper cup of water. Her reflection in the vending machine glass startled her, her hair disheveled, cheeks flushed, apron stained. She looked nothing like a hero. And yet, she couldn't deny the truth. She had acted when no one else did. She had kept the man alive long enough for help to arrive. Her phone buzzed with messages, classmates who had already seen posts about the incident, co-workers praising her in group chats. But Lin turned it face down. She didn't want noise, she wanted silence. The image of the man's face, pale and lifeless, replayed in her mind. So did the sound of his gasp, that fragile thread of life returning. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with something else, a profound realization. I am ready. I can do this. I belong in medicine. Walking home, when her shift ended, the night air outside was cool against her damp skin. She walked the familiar route home. But everything felt different. Streetlights seemed sharper, the hum of the city louder. Each step was heavy with exhaustion but also light with relief. She thought of her parents, how she would tell them, how they would beam with pride even as worry lined their faces. Halfway home, she stopped on a quiet street corner and tilted her face toward the stars. Her hands still ached from compressions, but she smiled through the ache. For once, she thought, they saw me, a new dawn approaching. But Lin knew this was only the beginning. The real storm, the public attention, the newspaper headlines, the shift in how everyone perceived her, was still on its way. For now, though, she allowed herself a single moment of stillness, breathing deeply, letting the night wrap around her. She was no longer just the girl behind the apron. She was something more. The morning after the collapse, Lin awoke with her hands still aching, her arms sore as if she had spent the night wrestling gravity itself. For a fleeting second, she wondered if it had all been a dream. The pale face, The compressions. The sudden gasp of breath, it almost felt unreal in the grey light of dawn. Then her phone began to buzz. The headline. She rubbed her eyes and reached for it. On the screen was a message from a classmate. "You're on the news, Lynn. Look." Her thumb hesitated before opening the link. A photo filled the screen, a blurry image of her kneeling beside the man. Hands pressed firmly on his chest. Her face caught in focus. Determined and unshaken. The headline screamed, "Waitress saves customer's life, medical student's heroism shines in crisis." Beneath it was a story recounting the collapse at Bella Vita, eyewitness testimonies, and praise for the young woman who remained calm when no one else could. Lynn's stomach turned. She hadn't done it for recognition. She had done it because there was no other choice. Still, she couldn't deny the swell of something warmer beneath her unease, validation. Perhaps, that years of being underestimated had not erased who she really was. The classroom reaction. At the university later that day, whispers followed her through the halls. Students she had barely spoken to before approached with wide eyes. "Was that really you? You knew exactly what to do. Incredible. Lynn, you saved a man's life. You're a hero." In pathology class, even Professor Harding, who rarely paused for anything off topic, looked up from his notes. "Miss Tran," he said, adjusting his glasses, "I read about your actions last night. Quick thinking under pressure, that's what makes a doctor." Lynn felt her cheeks flush. She bowed her head in acknowledgement, trying to hide the mix of pride and discomfort swelling in her chest. Messages from home. That evening, when she returned to her small apartment, her parents were waiting. Her mother held the newspaper in trembling hands, her eyes already wet with tears. Her father's usually stoic face was lit with something brighter than pride. It was all. "You saved a life," her mother whispered in Vietnamese, brushing Lynn's hair from her face. "All those nights studying, all those sacrifices. This is why." Her father gripped her shoulders with calloused hands. "You've already become the doctor we dreamed of, even without the white coat." Lynn's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to remind them she still had years of study, exams, and rotations ahead. But in that moment, their words filled her with a strength she hadn't known she craved. The price of spotlight, recognition, however, came with unease. Customers who once ignored her now returned to Bella Vita just to see her. Some asked for her table, not to order pasta, but to ask about the night she saved a man's life. Others whispered her name as she passed, their eyes following her in a way that felt more suffocating than admiring. Co-workers teased lightly, "Drive. Tran, can you refill my water?" But beneath their laughter was genuine respect. Marco, the manager, even posted the article on the restaurant's wall, circling her name in bold. Lynn smiled politely at all of it. But inside, she wrestled with a storm. She had lived invisible for so long that being the center of attention felt unnatural. She wasn't sure she wanted this spotlight. She only wanted to learn, to serve her family, to build her future quietly. Yet now, she was seen, and she couldn't go back. Letters and gratitude. 1 week after the incident, envelopes began arriving. Some were from strangers who had read her story, thanking her for reminding them of the goodness of people. Others came from aspiring medical students, calling her an inspiration. One letter stood out. It was from the wife of the man she had saved. "There are no words to thank you. Because of you, my husband is still alive. Our children still have their father. We will never forget you." Lynn read the letter 3 times, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. That was the only recognition she truly needed, the knowledge that a family remained whole because she had acted. Doubts in the quiet. And yet, alone at night, doubts crept in. She replayed the scene over and over. What if she had started compressions too late? What if she had hesitated longer? What if the man hadn't survived? Her professors assured her she had done everything right. But Lynn couldn't silence the whispers in her mind. Being seen also meant being judged. And the thought of failure under such a spotlight terrified her. Still, she returned to her textbooks, more determined than ever. If she was going to carry the weight of recognition, she would not let it crush her. A hint of return. Then, one evening at Bella Vita, as Lynn was clearing a table, Marco approached her with an unusual look. "Lynn," he said softly, "someone's asking to see you. He's waiting outside." Confused, she untied her apron and stepped into the cool night air. There, leaning against the doorway with his wife beside him, was the man she had saved. His skin was still pale. His movements slow, but his eyes shone with life. When he saw her, he straightened with effort, his lips curving into a trembling smile. "Miss Tran," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I needed to thank you in person." Lin's breath caught. The night that had changed everything was not finished with her yet. The cool night air brushed against Lin's cheeks as she stepped outside. Her apron still tied loosely around her waist. The glow of the restaurant lights spilled onto the sidewalk, mingling with the shadows of the city street. And there he was, the man from table 6. The man whose life she had felt slipping beneath her hands. His frame was weaker now, a cane in his right hand, his wife steadying him on the left. But his chest rose with breath. His eyes, those same eyes that had been glazed and lifeless a week ago, now shimmered with life and recognition. When he saw her, he straightened as best as he could. His lips trembled, but his smile was unmistakable. "Miss Tran," he rasped, his voice still rough but steady. "I had to come. I had to thank you." The handshake. For a moment, Lin froze. She wasn't sure what to say, wasn't sure how to receive gratitude that felt far larger than herself. Slowly, she reached out her hand. His fingers, warm and trembling, closed around hers. It was not just a handshake. It was a transfer, a weight of gratitude, of unspoken words, of second chances. His wife's eyes filled with tears. "If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't acted." Her voice broke, but she pressed on. "Our children would be fatherless. I would be a widow. You gave us more time." The words sank into Lin's chest, heavy and light all at once. She had replayed that night in her head countless times, questioning every choice, every second. But standing here, hearing these words, she finally allowed herself to believe she had done enough. She had done what mattered. The restaurant witnesses. The door to Bella Vita opened behind her, and a few diners stepped out, drawn by the presence of the man they had last seen crumpled on the floor. Their voices hushed as they recognized him, and as they recognized her. Soon, a small crowd gathered. Marco, the manager, stepped out too, his arms folded across his chest, his expression a mixture of pride and humility. Someone began to clap. It was hesitant at first, then stronger, until applause filled the sidewalk. Strangers, co-workers, even the businessman who had once mocked her, all clapping for the young woman who had once been invisible. Lin's throat tightened. She bowed her head, embarrassed by the attention, but her heart swelled with a quiet pride she could not suppress. A family's gratitude. The man's wife reached into her purse and pulled out a folded photograph. She pressed it into Lin's hands. It was of the man with his children, 2 teenagers, smiling awkwardly at the camera, their father's arms draped around their shoulders. "They still have him because of you," she whispered. Lin stared at the photo, her vision blurring with tears. She thought of her own father's calloused hands, her mother's weary smile. She thought of how fragile time was, how easily it could vanish, and how precious it was when returned. "Thank you," she whispered back, her voice breaking. The lesson in dignity. When the family left, the street grew quiet again. Lin remained outside, the photo still in her hands. She leaned against the brick wall, tears drying on her cheeks, her heart beating slower now, steadier. For years, she had been dismissed, by customers, by classmates, even sometimes by herself. She had hidden behind silence, enduring indignities with a bowed head. But tonight had changed everything. Not because the world had suddenly decided to see her, but because she had proven to herself what she was capable of. Heroism, she realized, was not about the headlines or the applause. It was about the moment when action was needed, and choosing not to look away. Quiet conversations. Back inside, Marco pulled her aside. "You don't have to finish your shift," he said gently. "You've done more for this place than anyone ever could." But Lin shook her head. "No, I'll work. People are still waiting for their meals." He chuckled softly, shaking his head in disbelief. "One day, you'll be in a hospital saving lives for real. And we'll all say, we knew her when she was here." The words warmed her, but Lin only smiled faintly. She wasn't chasing fame, she was chasing purpose. Returning home. That night, as she walked home, the stars seemed brighter than usual, scattered like pinpricks of hope across the California sky. The photo the family had given her was tucked safely in her bag. She imagined her parents' faces when she showed them, She imagined telling her professors that everything they had taught her had mattered. Had saved someone. Most of all, she imagined the road ahead, not as an impossible climb, but as a path she was already walking. One step, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. A reflection. At her apartment, Lynn sat at her desk. Her textbooks lay open, pages filled with diagrams of hearts, arteries, and emergency protocols. She placed the photograph between the pages, marking her place. For once, she didn't feel like she was studying in the shadows. She felt illuminated from within. She whispered into the quiet room, "I'm ready." And she believed it. The final bow. Weeks later, the incident at Bella Vita had faded from headlines, replaced by other stories. But for Lynn, it remained a quiet turning point. Customers no longer looked through her. Classmates no longer doubted her. But none of that mattered as much as the stillness she carried inside herself now, the certainty that she belonged. One night, as she tied her apron before her shift, she caught her reflection in the mirror. For the first time, she didn't see just a waitress. She saw a future doctor. She saw a daughter of immigrants. She saw a young woman who had refused to disappear. She smiled at her reflection, tied the final knot, and stepped into the dining room. Invisible no more.